right, let it rip. Today we're talking about cops and the community. Hey, I'm Mike Gilliam in the CUNY TV studios in the shadow of the Empire State Building in New York City. Welcome to Let It Rip. On September 6th, off-duty Dallas Police Patrol Officer Amber Geiger walked into the Dallas apartment of businessman Botham Jean and shot him dead while he was eating a bowl of ice cream. She was later convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years behind bars. Less than 2 weeks after her sentencing, a white police officer shot and killed a black Fort Worth woman in her home while responding to a wellness check. The woman, Tatiana Jefferson, was reportedly playing video games when Officer Aaron Dean approached and ordered her to show her hands. Body cam footage shows he fired through her window almost immediately, killing the 28-year-old with her 8-year-old nephew in the room. Two cases that raise questions about what is driving police interactions with people of color and why so many of them end up with unarmed black and brown people dead. Here to help us understand what's really going on, we have Victor Dempsey. He's the brother of Darrin Small, a 37-year-old man who was shot and killed by black off-duty NYPD police officer Wayne Isaacs in Brooklyn during an alleged road rage incident. The officer was later acquitted of murder and manslaughter charges. This was the first prosecution under a 2015 directive from New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to investigate and prosecute police killings of unarmed civilians. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Thanks for coming in. Briefly walk us through what you believe happened with your brother's case.
The story that I got that day was he was driving home and another individual was driving their car pretty recklessly, where at sometimes it almost made him crash into other vehicles. Unfortunately, my brother came to a red light where he seen a vehicle next to him, and what I was told, he wanted to go say something to the guy about how he was driving because he almost got into an accident. Upon my brother approaching that car, he was shot 3 times. Instantaneously. Within seconds, my brother was fighting for his life. Wayne Isaacs murdered my brother that day. He shot him 3 times for simply walking towards his car. That was that.
Okay. Now, I have to say, because the NYPD is not a part of this conversation, that their story is a little bit different than what you're telling. They're saying that your brother punched the cop through the window a few times, and then he did this in self-defense, correct?
That is correct, Mike. That statement you made is 100% correct. And the fact that you were able to say exactly what the officer said, I'm actually impressed with. You just mentioned that the officer originally said my brother hit him a few times. Mm-hmm. A few times, some would assume or know it means more than once, maybe more than twice, maybe sometimes more than 3 times. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, for Wayne Isaacs and my brother, a video surfaced. At the time when Isaacs gave that original statement of my brother hitting him a few times, he didn't know there was a video that captured everything. Mm-hmm. When that video surfaced, it showed that my brother was shot as soon as he approached the vehicle.
Okay. Most of us have lost loved ones, okay? But how does that differ from losing a loved one in a police-involved shooting, something like this?
It's a very big difference. I think the biggest difference is you lost a loved one to someone who sworn to protect them. But besides losing the physical person, families like myself and my families till this day, we still suffer someone not being held accountable for their actions. So it continuously haunts us day in and day out. It continuously shows, what if he wasn't there that day? Of what if this officer never attained that job or that position? So it's a lot different than losing someone to a natural death or losing someone to a car accident, of things where you know exactly what happened.
Do you think that there's some sort of inherent problem with police dealing with people of color?
I do. A lot of folks, working with families since my brother's death and working with new families since my brother's death, we learned that there is a big blue shield, so to speak, or this unspoken code of silence when it comes to NYPD or law enforcement in general. I don't know. I don't want to say I don't know if they're scared of the community, but they don't know that the community is scared of them. So I think what I've seen played out in a few cases after my brother is officers are acting prematurely. They're making decisions on someone's life because they feel they can. And time again, it showed that these officers are actually justified in their shootings. So when we look at that cultural difference, so to speak, or just dealing with black and brown people, there's just no regard for life there, in my opinion. There's no regard. We've seen countless videos where Columbine shootings, other mass shootings of a different culture or different ethnic background or Caucasian folks, and they're getting tased. They're living to fight trial. They're living their days in a penitentiary cell. But they're killing people just like these cops are.
Now, what do you think causes that, though? Do you think that there's a situation where they are just afraid for their lives, which is often what is used as the reason for them taking this thing? They feel threatened, and that's why they have taken action. Or do you think it's something more than that? Could race play a role?
I think it's much bigger than that. I think it's even much bigger than race right now, in my opinion. I think the culture of law enforcement is broken. I think their culture just says they're above everyone else and they're supreme being. Yeah, I think race plays an issue, but I also believe that cultural subset of law enforcement where they feel they have the power to do anything. And also knowing when you see officers get off on these murder cases or not even being tried, and just knowing that their superiors are going to have their back, the first thing that comes out of officers' mouth is, I was scared. I was in fear for my life. And I can give you a quick example of the contradiction to that, Mike. Last year, or earlier this year, I could be wrong, a young man by the name of Tavon Santana was shot 3 times in Brownsville, Brooklyn. This officer tried to say the young man had tried to attack him and rob him. Again, another video surfaced. The young man was not trying to attack him or rob him. It came out that they was in a lovers quarrel. That officer even tried to plant a weapon on the young man to frame him. So before that video came out, that officer said he was afraid for his life because this young man was trying to rob him.
One of the things that I often think about when we get on to this aspect of the story is I've covered a lot of these stories that have happened here as a street reporter in New York City. And one of the things that I've noticed is they have a certain amount of intimidation that takes place at the trials. They show up with a lot of guys from the union in uniform, and they kind of hover over like the so-called perpetrator or whatever in these trials. The other thing I notice is that you have so many of these officers who live outside of the city of New York who basically get on that train on Long Island and come in here to police the city. And I have to believe that one of their goals is to make it back out safe.
Exactly. That's their main goal. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think anyone in any occupation wants to go home the same way they left it, right? But at the same time, when we talk about Charleston, South Carolina, this young man was shot in the back. And there's been numerous cases of folks shot in the back. At what point did someone pose a threat to you where you're shooting them in the back? Is it maybe something was awry, or it was you mistook something being awry, and you acted on your instinct? You didn't act on your training. You did not act on your procedures and protocol. You acted the way you want to act, and instead of that law enforcement department or whatever it is taking full responsibility and chastising that person or even charging the person officially, no, they back it. Why? Because, again, that cultural thing comes back in. They cannot be wrong. They're superior than everyone else. They're going to stand up against what anyone's saying about them. So I think in hindsight what it does is forget the legal proceedings at times, or just take that equation out. It now becomes, I'm right, you're wrong. And then some people can view it as, oh, I'm white, you're black, so none of that matters. And some people can just view it as, well, I'm a cop and you're a civilian. So who's going to believe who?
Victor, thank you for that perspective. Very important to hear from a family who's lost a loved one to one of these police shootings. Thank you. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll dig a little bit deeper into the problem of these shootings that have claimed so many lives and also torn apart so many families on both sides of the issue. We're going to be joined by retired NYPD Lieutenant, criminal justice professor, and TV and radio commentator Darrin Porcher. You're watching Let It Rip. Hi, I'm Mike Gilliam, and the show is Let It Rip. We're coming to you from New York City with a viewpoint that goes beyond the headlines. We're talking politics, the economy, social unrest, the things that matter most to you. It's called Let It Rip. Come join us for the conversation. Over the years, there have been a number of high-profile cases in which unarmed people of color have died at the hands of police. Michael Brown, shot and killed by a white officer in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, touching off days of unrest. The shooting followed an altercation between Brown and Officer Darrin Wilson. The officer was not indicted. In 2015 in Charleston, South Carolina, Walter Scott was shot in the back following a daytime traffic stop for a non-functioning brake light. The officer, Michael Slager, was charged with murder after video surfaced showing Scott being shot from behind while fleeing, which did not match the account in the police report. The officer was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison in a federal civil rights case. Here in New York, we've had more than our share of controversial police cases, many gaining national attention, including the chokehold death of Eric Garner. In November of 2006, Sean Bell was shot and killed and two of his friends wounded outside a strip club in Queens, where he was hosting a bachelor party the night before his planned wedding. Who can forget the sodomizing of Haitian immigrant Abner Louima with a broomstick in a bathroom at the 70th Precinct Station House in Brooklyn in 1997. 2 cops went to jail in that case. And don't forget the shooting of Amadou Diallo by Bronx cops who said they thought he was pulling out a gun instead of his wallet on the steps of his home in 1999. They fired 41 times, hitting Diallo with 19 of the shots, killing the 23-year-old. All 4 officers were charged with second-degree murder, but acquitted in a trial up in Albany. Here to join our conversation is retired NYPD Lieutenant Darrin Porcher.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you in here. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of this stuff. A lot of different cases that I've cited just here, and I have relatives who are police officers, so we all know that there are good officers out there as well. But where do you think the problem really lies here, Darrin?
Well, a lot of this, we have to look at it from a case-by-case perspective. I go back to my experience as a lieutenant in the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau. I saw a multitude of a lot of these shootings, just several of these shootings that you just mentioned, Sean Bell being one of them. I've seen these shootings come across my desk. I should say I've seen these cases. And one of the things we need to do is we need to focus on each case from an individual perspective. Now, when we spotlight these cases, one of the things that I often see that's an issue of question is the professional development. How were these officers trained? Were they effectively positioned to handle these types of encounters that have occurred in the street? The same holds true in a lot of these shootings that you mentioned outside, such as the Michael Brown shooting, the Michael Slager shooting. The one key thing that I see, I want to say the foundation of the majority of it is the professional development. Training is something that needs to ever so revolutionize as we move forward. We can't stick to a training pattern that we used back in the 1970s. We have to constantly change things. And when we look at the advent of technology such as video that we see that's being used everywhere, that's also become more of an assistance for not just police, but also the public as well, in connection with a quality assurance component, such as what I did in the Internal Affairs Bureau.
You talked about training, though. Okay, so is there any training that helps a white officer to understand that not every person of color is a danger to them? How is that handled in the training?
Well, what you're referring to is something we call implicit bias. Implicit bias training has come into play just, I want to say maybe over the last few years. In the NYPD, after the Eric Garner case, that's when the NYPD employed this strategy of conducting implicit bias training for all officers in the NYPD. I think it took them maybe a year or 2 years to train everyone in the department. And so when we think about implicit bias, that's basically, we all have an implicit bias. That's somewhat of a stereotype, if you want to refer to it as that. So when you give me the example of how can, let's say, how can a Caucasian male or female identify an African male or an African American female as a non-threat, it goes back to a level of comfort, the constant engaging with the person of the cross race. So when you feel a level of comfort in dealing with people of an alternate race, that's what reduces your level of fear when you're dealing with or engaging that individual.
So I'm going to stop you there for a second, because what that brings up to me right away is community policing and having a residency requirement. Do you think something like that is needed? Because if you have guys who are all living in Hicksville coming into police Harlem, you have that situation, don't you?
I believe the residency requirement should be in play for a different reason. The reason why I think that we should have the residency requirement is because of tax revenue. We have officers that come from, let's say, upstate or Long Island. Their taxes, our tax dollars are affording their pay. When you go to a place like Suffolk County, I live in New York. I can't become a cop in Suffolk County, and that's merely based on the tax revenue, because the tax dollars drive and support that police budget. So I think that that's my reason for why we should have a residency requirement. But when we take in consideration the officers that come from other places, sure, these things happen.
Victor, what do you think about that whole argument of having people live in the city that they police?
I actually agree with it. I feel that, growing up, I'm not that old in years, but growing up, I remember I used to see the same officer in junior high school every day, same time I would walk to school. It wasn't school guard, so to speak, but I also remember back then also NYPD wasn't school safety too. So I make that very vast difference to say that even now, when I think about should they live in certain neighborhoods, school safety is a division of NYPD now. So they're policing our youth, black and brown kids too, in the schools and in the streets. The reason why I think that residency plays a big part, because if you can see these folks every day, sometimes you can understand the backstory to an individual. And there's always a backstory to an individual. I try to peel the layers back. We talk about the same way media do when someone's shot. Someone's shot or murdered, they're dehumanized. All of these things come out about that person in the media, whether they had a charge, whether they had an arrest warrant, whatever it is. But you don't know what that person was going through. Even when we come to talking about drugs and the war on drugs and things like that, but having officers who might know the neighborhood more intricately than others, I think it can play a big part as to how they respond, and to what Darrin mentioned earlier, that comfortability level of when you're policing or patrolling these neighborhoods.
I was going to touch on that, Darrin. Do you believe that the officers feel that they are accountable, that there will be repercussions if they are involved in one of these shootings? Or is there kind of a feeling that, hey, you do what you have to do the job, but also to make it out safely, and you're going to be covered by the union if something goes down?
Well, the union can do only but so much. All the union does is they afford protections through legal defense and things to that effect. But when we look at the department, the police officers, and I give you an example of the NYPD, there's an extreme level of oversight in the NYPD. You have the Civilian Complaint Review Board. You have the Internal Affairs Bureau. You have each county's district attorney that has a rackets bureau that focuses on police corruption and political corruption. And in addition to that, you have the Attorney General, the State Attorney General's office. And outside of that, you have federal monitors. Just recently, the NYPD was under a federal monitor as a result of a consent decree. So the truth of the matter is, you do have oversight, and I don't necessarily think that the officers commit to acts of misconduct because they believe that they can get away with it. I think a lot of it is the situational, and ultimately I think my main concern is the professional development. You need to train the officers accordingly, and implicit bias is something that we spoke to earlier. But in addition to that, tactics need to constantly evolve, because as we advance as a society, the tactics advance as well.
2 points, Darrin, man. As far as oversight, I kind of want to disagree with Darrin as far as NYPD has oversight over them, right? When my brother's trial, not even just my brother's case, but in numerous other families' cases, we've explored every single avenue of justice, every single avenue. when we talk about CCRB in general, let's say someone does file that complaint on the officer. Now we're working with an entity that's going to investigate on their time when they need to. But they also need to work in conjunction with NYPD to find certain facts. Numerous cases where we have heard and seen personally where NYPD is not responding to CCRB's requests or things of that nature. Now there's a timeline that we didn't know about, but it exists today. So when it comes to oversight, I don't personally agree with that because of history. History has been repeating itself over and over and over again. Procedures and protocols change. And like Darrin said, yes, a lot of these cases are case-by-case basis. We cannot say this happened in that case, so this should be different here. But what I have learned is the patterns of certain law enforcement entities. With me working nationally and working with other families in different states with different laws and legislations, the only significant thing that we see that repeats itself is that felt protection of the blue wall, so to speak. And the reason why I think that point is very, 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 very important, because when we get to the departmental trials or the criminal trials, well, by time a case gets to trial, let's say in New York, average time maybe has been a little fast lately, let's say a year. Average time to get into that. That's a whole year from someone being murdered to a storyline being presented in a different manner. And the man I'm speaking about is NYPD, because they're the ones who have all of the evidence, or most of the evidence, in the very beginning. New York State especially have the worst discovery laws ever. So the oversight part, I'm kind of, I can't solely agree with, because I've been to the Inspector General's office, so many different offices where I thought there was oversight there, but it didn't pan out that way. Recruitment, we all know, I think we all should know, NYPD's recruitment has been at the all-time lowest in the last 3 years. No one wants to become a cop on fire. I'm not going to say no one. Let's not say that, because there are graduated academies every year.
But there's been a major backlash against the
There's
NYPD
a big lack of folks who want to become officers. So I know this sounds cliche, but when we talk about that psychological evaluation or testing that's being done, if we're not getting folks who want to be cops, I'm not going to lie. When I was a kid, firefighter, officer, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And my age, we had that thought. This time of day with this millennials, as we call them now, and we have activists sailing the seas for different causes, the game's changed in a way where people are seeing things, especially when it comes to technology and social media and things of that nature. We're seeing things firsthand. So now are we talking about just police procedures, or are we talking about humans and humanity and things of that nature? So a lot of times I think we separate the two, and that's where it can get confusing in the courtroom.
How do we fix this problem, though? What do you think, Darrin?
It's not a one-fix solution. It needs to be a collaborative process. I'm one that applauds outside entities coming in and assisting. Oftentimes, police departments are closed-door organizations, and things happen behind closed doors. I think that we need professionals such as psychologists, social workers that can collaborate with police to form these strategies. Also, I think we need to look to the teachable moments that have happened in places outside of New York City.
Victor, you're agreeing with that?
I definitely agree with that.
Okay, real quick, I'm almost out of time here. Quick question for both of you here. We just changed police commissioners again here in New York City. Should that position be an appointed position by the mayor, or should that be an elected position like a sheriff to add more accountability? What do you think, Darrin?
I'm a strong proponent in this being an elected position. The mayor, basically, there's a level of nepotism attached to whoever the mayor appoints. When we look to other places where the sheriff, or I want to say the chief law enforcement officer, is elected, you have far greater results when you look at quantitative statistics of civilian complaints, arrests, and things to that effect than when you have an appointment process. So I'm a firm proponent of the elected process as opposed to the appointment.
Victor?
Same here. I think elected, it can help the community members be more involved in what's going on, feel like we have kind of stake in what's happening here. But when they're appointed, it's just we have to deal with what's going to come. I mean, granted, anytime there's a vote for something, we either hit or we miss. Some people like it or you don't, but at least the power is in our hands as well.
Okay. Victor, Darrin, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
Okay. We're going to take a short break, and I'll be back with some final thoughts. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip.
You're watching CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
We've discussed a lot and established that the problem is not a new one, but rather a persistent one that spans the country from coast to coast. It's also not simply a big city problem. Sure, you have the incidents in New York and you had Rodney King in L.A., but smaller locations like Charleston have wrestled with the issue too. So how do you fix the problem? Is it a problem that can be fixed? We've heard a lot of ideas. There really are a lot of questions, though. Is this a matter of better screening of police applicants? Are we giving the wrong people a gun and a badge and asking them to keep us safe? Are we asking too much of them, given the things a modern police officer must deal with on a daily basis? What about the training? Are we dropping the ball there? Where does racism fit into the equation? That is the elephant in the room, isn't it? And what of community policing? Are we setting ourselves up for trouble when officers live outside of the cities they work in and commute to the job, hell-bent on just making it home safely and earning the pension? Should they have to live in the communities or at least the cities they police? But then, how can you tell a person where they have to live, especially with the cost of living so high in some areas and the schools not as good as suburban schools? Incentives? Well, there are lots of questions and not too many easy answers. Still, there are some good things to think about. I'm Mike Gilliam. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Let It Rip.